What is up, everybody? Welcome in to Shout, a Buffalo football podcast. He's Ryan Talbot. I am Matt Parrino. I'm sorry we're a few minutes late. We've been so good lately, Ryan. We've been on time. We've been diligent about the start of the show. I see some fun little comments here to start us off. Bring all the comments. Let's go. Let's get this party started in the YouTube chat tonight. Speaking of which, if you're watching Shout tonight on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe to the show as well. Ryan, we are 8 days away from the NFL draft. We got a chance to talk to Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott, Josh Allen, Von Miller, Micah Hyde, Damar Hamlin yesterday in Orchard Park. So much to get into here tonight. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Like you said, I mean, we are so close to the draft, a week and a day away, and got to have a little bit of taste of football with all the press conferences yesterday. So I'm ready to go and talk some Bills football.
Let me ask you this to start off, and this could be kind of like a good little appetizer, if you will, because I did scour through Brandon Beane's press conference, and we're going to talk about a couple specific things that he said to see if we can kind of glean any insight into what he's thinking moving towards the draft and picking it at number 27. What was your major takeaway with where the Bills are at after hearing everybody talk tomorrow going into it? What do you think the mindset is? What do you think the philosophy is going into this draft?
Oh, that's a great question. I was actually going to say, I really like it. It almost felt like Brandon Beane was brutally honest at times yesterday when he said, based on where they were cap wise, based on what they could do, they feel like they filled the roster pretty well. And he acknowledged it's not perfect. It's not what his plan A would have been had they had more money. But he feels like, right now this is a team that can go out and compete and win games. So that's the first thing that kind of came to mind for me is he acknowledged that this roster is still flawed. It has some issues. There's some players that need to be, I shouldn't say players. There's some positions that need to be addressed. And obviously the draft can do a little bit of that. The undrafted free agencies, some post draft cuts. We've talked about the fact that you can sign players at a certain point in May where it doesn't count against your compensatory pick formula. So there's still work to be done. So that's the first thing that came to mind for me. And I think that's actually a good, launching point here as we get into the draft. There's work to be done with this roster. In about 8 days, that work's going to start.
Yeah, and I thought one interesting question that came up for me was, did Brandon think that he filled enough holes? Because that's kind of the main objective going into free agency, right? Go and sign a bunch of players so that your roster is at a point of health going into the draft where you don't have to reach on a player. And there's so many scenarios, Ryan, especially at 27, where we're talking about players from a need perspective for the Bills because they're so close, right? This is a roster that's built to compete, built to, not only win the AFC East, but to compete for a Super Bowl. And when you're doing that, any type of missing, links in the fence, you're going to pay more attention to that. And that's why I think guys like Jack Campbell have gotten so much buzz. And, some of these wide receivers with the Bills, bringing in some secondary free agents and Deontay Hardy and Trent Sherfield, but maybe still an upgradable piece. And that can kind of lead us into the first quote that I pulled from him. So he was asked about, a strategy question and how he look. I mean, one of the big topics early on was at 27, you're going to probably be picking, if you stick and pick, from a pool of players that none of them have a first round grade. And Beane was asked point blank, like, how many players do you have with a first round grade? And he's like, I'm not quite there yet. They're still kind of working through the end part of the process, but he said, it's not good.
It's not good.
And so it's not good. And, he's talked about a couple of trade scenarios. We'll get to that in a few minutes, but here's the quote, and I want to talk a little bit about it. You got to go in and look for the players that you like, that fit what you do, and fit. You've got defined roles if you take them. This guy is going to come in. He's going to compete to start with player X, or he's going to be a really good backup for us year one, maybe help us on special teams. But we think year two, he's a replacement for someone who's got an expiring contract. So what do you make of that statement? Because that second part for me leads me directly to Gabe Davis and maybe another player that Bills fans are not going to want to hear this, but Ed Oliver, because even Beane made it a point to say there's 4 defensive tackles on this roster right now that aren't under contract in 2024.
Yeah, I mean, you can look at it from a 2023 perspective. You can look at it from even a look back 1 year ago. Is he maybe alluding to the fact that they believe in a Terrell Bernard to step up and be that Tremaine Edmonds replacement? And that's why the Bills haven't had any reported top 30 free agents with any of the top inside linebackers in this draft. He came in. I can't sit here and say he was a great backup. He played some special teams. Maybe they have that confidence in him. But for this year's roster, yeah, the Bills have been in on quite a few of those round 1, round 2 wide receivers. Obviously Zay Flowers, Addison, Hyatt's more of that round 2 guy. Yep, Smith and Jigba, who is right now projected to be that top guy. Those could be Gabe Davis replacements. Those could be long-term guys, knowing that maybe in a few years Stefon Diggs isn't on this roster anymore. I'm not saying this is his last year, but you have to start thinking that way too. He's getting to that age where wide receivers kind of hit a wall in terms of not being the player they used to be. So I think wide receiver makes a lot of sense, and the interest that they've shown makes a lot of sense. And defensive tackle, yes, that makes sense as well. Mozzie Smith, top 30 visitor, athletic freak. I think he was Bruce Feldman's number 1 athletic freak in this draft class. It's an article I like to read every year, and it talked about that. And listen, the tape doesn't match the athleticism that he has displayed necessarily. But if the Bills took him at number 27, it would make sense based on the roster right now, based on the fact that they have a lot of expiring contracts coming up at defensive tackle. They don't necessarily have any long-term solutions there. In a perfect world, would they like to extend Ed Oliver maybe at a team-friendly number, a number that the team finds to be fair to both parties? Sure, absolutely. Still a young guy, someone you drafted 9th overall a few years back. But yeah, I think defensive tackle and a guy like Mozzie Smith makes a lot of sense. What do you think, Matt?
The thing about it is that I struggle with is the assortment of realities for whichever player that they take, the uncertainty around it. Like, it's the draft, like you're taking a player, but I think that this quote kind of encapsulates one of the problems that we've talked about quite a bit over the course of the last few months. And that is, that lack of a plan for a player when you take it. And I think like sometimes you can fall into this trap of, all right, we're not going to put too much pressure on a player. We're going to draft them. We're going to develop them. But at the same time, there should be a level of expectation that comes with whether you want to be a first round pick, second round pick, third round pick. I mean, we're seeing across the league, guys come in and become stars, second round draft picks. I mean, especially at the receiver position. I mean, This is a weird draft though, Ryan. It's something I want to ask Beane about yesterday. I didn't get a chance to work it in based on the press conference, and maybe they'll come up next week when the draft plays out and we get a chance to dive into this class a little bit more deeply, because he doesn't want to show too many cards now anyway. So maybe it's not the right time to ask this question, but this is a historic wide receiver class from a size perspective. You're talking about four, I think, of the top 10 wide receivers under 179 pounds. That is, historic in a lot of ways. And one where I think it makes the evaluation process even that much more challenging when you're trying to project, how do those players fit into what you do at the NFL level? Can they play more than just the slot? Because even a guy like Jordan Addison, and Zay Flowers, the evaluators are saying they can win at all 3 levels. There's a variety to their game. The size component might just push them more naturally into the spot, especially with what the Bills have on their roster already if they end up taking one of these receivers. So I just think from that perspective, like, there's so many hiccups in the evaluation, potential hiccups, that I don't know, it doesn't elicit a lot of confidence, especially knowing how it's been a struggle to find impact players for the Bills in year one, outside of Greg Rousseau, who I think you can argue was an impact player. He wasn't a dominant player by any stretch, but he played some valuable football for them as a rookie.
Yeah, if the Bills' mentality is let's not put too much pressure on these rookies, it's a terrible mentality to have, because you said it. There's so many first, second, and third round picks that come in and make an immediate impact. And I see in the chat here from Richard Greenwood, the Chiefs started 8 rookies in the Super Bowl. The Chiefs had a great rookie class, and top to bottom, they had a lot of guys contribute for them. And that was already a roster that was a Super Bowl contender. The Bills, for whatever reason, they did not get anywhere close to the same amount of bang for their buck. So the Bills do need to kind of figure out, listen, I get that this is a good roster. There's a lot of starting jobs that have already been claimed and taken, but you shouldn't be going in with the mentality that, well, they can come in and compete, but we do like our guys. We're going to bank on them being a bigger contributor in year two. I want them to be thinking of, let's find this guy that is really going to push this player to the brink, and we really want to get him onto the field year one. As for the wide receivers, you're right, Matt. I mean, there's a lot of questions about the size of these receivers, a lot of the top receivers in this draft class. And as good as they can be, the Addisons, the Zay Flowers, I've spoken highly about Flowers. I think Addison's a great player as well. The durability aspect of it, being a smaller framed receiver, the hits you're going to take, it's a concern because in the NFL, you get some hits laid on you and you could be off on the sidelines for a few weeks at a time. So you want to make sure that whoever you do bring in, whether it's a receiver, whether it's someone on the defense side of the ball, this, that, or the other, is someone that you feel like is going to hold up, not just in their rookie seasons, but, long-term in this league, because when you're taking someone at number 27 or in round 2 or in round 3, you're banking on them to be a solid contributor for the foreseeable future for those first, 4 years of their rookie deals.
I wanted to ask you about, there was a report that came out, I believe it was today, that the Bills on a top 30 visit hosting Deonte Banks, cornerback, which I think is interesting because this is a guy that is projected to go probably in that range where the Bills are picking, potentially maybe even before the Bills are picking. He's a guy that has been a late riser. And sometimes the riser conversation is interesting in and of itself because maybe he's not rising. Maybe he was always kind of thought of in that range in NFL circles. And, the draft internet is just catching up. Did that catch you by surprise at all that the Bills are, used a top 30 visit on a cornerback? And what might that say for, I don't know, not only Kaiir Elam, but Tre'Davious White as well, maybe?
Well, it's kind of twofold. One, I think the Bills are kind of thinking, okay, what we saw from Trey White last year, he was coming back from a serious injury. He didn't look like himself. It's a contract that you can get out of sooner rather than later. So if he does struggle this year, you might want to just work on that depth. And I know fans wouldn't like to hear that after taking Elam a year ago, after having some young guys. But cornerback's such an important position. It's a pivotal role for this team. But different player, another cornerback that the Bills kind of have met with over this process, and I'm blanking on the player right now, but he talked in this interview about how when they were talking to the Bills defensive backs coach, he mentioned that every player that's kind of starting on this team at one point was a cornerback. So all the safeties have kind of transitioned over from cornerback and how they like that versatility. So I think that the Bills kind of look at all their options. Brandon Beane has already said he's going to try to take the best player available in this draft class. If it's a cornerback, would it be a surprise? Yes, because it's not one of their most pressing needs. It's not something where a lot of the fans are looking at it. I think a lot of the fans are going into this hoping for offense, hoping for more weapons for Josh Allen or more protection for him on the line. But they're doing their due diligence on the secondary as a whole. A lot of safeties, a lot of cornerbacks that could be those mid-round, late-round guys, a few early-round players as well. They're doing this for a reason. You're not just going to waste a private workout, a top 30 visit, even these Zoom interviews, if you're not interested in them in some capacity.
Yeah, some good comments tonight. Our good buddy Pops Mafia, Harold, who's always hanging around somewhere around the tunnel on game days before usually give him a wave. I'm a wave up from Channel 4. I think it says more about what they think about the players behind the starting cornerbacks. And to your point, that transition plan from cornerback to safety, Christian Benford, I know the Bills, they seem to be steadfast in keeping him at corner for now. That seems to be the feedback that they've given throughout this, playoff. But maybe, they go out and they get a player that, slots in at cornerback, whether it be in the second or third or fourth round. And that makes them more comfortable about starting to cross develop him in kind of the same way they did with Cam Lewis, because I don't see a consistent role at corner for Benford with the way things are situated right now, without a major injury. I think Kaiir Elam, they must have learned from year one maybe where they failed him, letting him have more of an opportunity in year 2 to maybe sink or swim a little bit will kind of force a lot of other guys down. And don't forget that they re-signed Dane Jackson.
Yeah, absolutely. It will be interesting, though, if they take a cornerback early in this draft. They're going to put themselves in a tough spot with a guy like Benford. And he was a day 3 pick last year, but when he was on the field, he showed some promise at corner. They liked his ability after they drafted him, said he could eventually be a safety. That's been a discussion this offseason, as you mentioned. But now you're looking at the safety position. It feels like they're 4 deep after Damar Hamlin's announcement yesterday, which we'll get into here in a minute. But they also have some guys that have short-term deals at the position, so maybe they're looking for the future there. If they go cornerback early, though, it's going to be interesting how that moves some players around on this roster. And Clark Phillips III, a cornerback out of Utah that's expected to be a day 2 pick. I've seen him a lot in the second round of mock drafts. He was the one that had the Zoom interview where he talked about the Bills mentioning the fact that at one point all of these starters were cornerbacks. Some of them transitioned to safety. They like the players that have the versatility to do both. So there's another player right there that the Bills are doing their due diligence on that could be one of their top 3 picks in this year's draft.
If you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, go back on the YouTube feed, dial up the Apple Spotify feed, and listen back to our NFL draft special from Wingnuts last Saturday. Wingnuts, now the official chicken wing of Shout, a Buffalo football podcast. We're so excited. That means every single month you are going to have a live event on the calendar. Tentatively planned for May 20th. We were trying to find the May date earlier today, Ryan. We're still kind of hovering around what that looks like, but May 20th, I think, is probably the safest bet at this point. But we'll update you with the next show. Saturday night was wild. It was awesome.
Yeah, great turnout. Joe B brought the heat with some of his takes. Had great analysis as always. So glad we could have him on. Thank you to everyone that turned out. Great support from Bills fans right there locally in Buffalo. But we had some fans, two sets of couples from Syracuse. Rochester, some Rochester friends came in, Jamestown, New York. And we had a Bills fan that resides in Atlanta, Georgia, that came to the show because he wanted to check out Wingnuts. He heard about it on the podcast. He listens to it on his way to work. So awesome time at Wingnuts. Can't wait for the next show.
I can't either. It was so much fun meeting everybody, hearing about their story. And if you do come out to one of these events, please do not hesitate to walk up to Ryan and I. We'll usually be setting up for the show, mingling, break into the conversation, interrupt, whatever you got to do. We are there to meet everybody. So if you came out for the show, we'd love to chat with you, talk a little Bills. We got some other stuff in the works as well. We're super excited about that. More details to come on that, but get ready because it's going to give you more access to Ryan Talbot and Matt Parrino than you've ever had before. We're really excited about it. Okay, here's this next quote from Brandon Beane. I want to talk about Josh Allen. I want to talk about Damar Hamlin. We'll get to both of those things, but Brandon Beane said something interesting. It's a continuation of the same company line that we've heard since before free agency started. And here's the specific quote I want to talk about. I think between all those linebackers, I put that in parentheses. He said, guys, they re-signed AJ Klein. They have the 2 second-year players, Inspector and Terrell Bernard, and then obviously Tyrell Dotson. We feel good that we have that position covered. And wouldn't that be exactly what Brandon Beane wants other NFL GMs to think, that the Bills aren't in the market for any linebacker? Drew Sanders, Jack Campbell, you can keep him. We are not interested. Just let him maybe linger around to pick 59 so that they can swoop on one of those guys maybe if teams don't think the Bills will take one at 27. I don't know. It feels like too much for a regime in McDermott and Brandon Beane who are so unwilling, more so McDermott than Beane, but in general, unwilling to crown unproven guys. They've really stand STANNED, the Spectre, Dotson, Bernard trio this year. And to your point earlier in the podcast, maybe there is just that kind of belief in the guy that they picked in the 3rd round last year the upside of Spectre, a guy that, the RAS, the relative athletic score is off the charts. I think he had a 9.13 out of 10 coming out last year of Clemson. So, and then obviously Dotson's played a lot of snaps for them, but I don't know. It just feels funny.
Yeah, so first and foremost, I think they're covering all bases. Say that you have a lot of the confidence in your guys in the event that you don't land one of these two top linebackers that you've kind of been linked to in mock drafts a lot over the last few months. I truly do think that the Bills don't view Sanders or Campbell as first-round picks. I think that's fair based on their history of top 30 visits, unless they just haven't been announced and they both come in perhaps. The Bills usually draft the guys that they've at least brought into the building. They've met with this, that, or the other. But do I think they're interested in adding one of them in round 2, even potentially trading up in round 2 to get one of them? Absolutely. And what the Bills can do is they can sit there on the second night of the draft and say, well, this player, whether it's Sanders, let's just say Sanders hypothetically, well, he really stood out on our board compared to everyone else that was available. So we wanted to go up and get him. We're not promising him anything. We'll let him come in and compete for the job. They'll say all the right things. They're still protecting the players they have in this roster, but they're also pretty much acknowledging, yeah, we never really did replace Tremaine Edmonds or add a replacement to him in free agency from outside of this building. And we want to give ourselves the option of bringing a young guy in, developing them, molding them, and trying to get them more involved. And it could be something where, as much as you and I hate it, maybe they try to ease that player into the job, and it's not a week 1 starter. It's someone that gets the job week 4, week 5 after they let these veterans kind of get their turns at it, the Dodsons of the world or these second-year players. But I think the Bills are just kind of protecting themselves in the event that neither of them fall into their laps in round 2 or they can't trade up for one of them. Then they've said all the right things about the guys they have internally. But if one of them were to fall, or if they're able to trade up in round 2 to get one, then they can say, well, they stuck out on the board. We liked them. We like their makeup. We like their productivity, and kind of go from there.
Speaking of Joe Buscaglia, great question to Sean McDermott about the Luke Kuechly connection, and if he has talked to Kuechly about Jack Campbell. And, we get a smile out of McDermott from time to time, but it's not too often that you get kind of like a pronounced like giggle. Chuckle maybe is a better way to describe it. And when he was asked that question, you saw him grinning ear to ear, knowing exactly what Joe was implying. And he said, no, he didn't talk to Luke Kuechly about Jack Campbell, but it felt super tongue in cheek. Like, yeah, duh. Obviously the guy basically, lives in Buffalo for about 3 or 4 days every training camp.
Yeah, and listen, maybe the Bills didn't reach out first, but I guarantee you Kuechly's reaching out to McDermott and Beane saying, hey, this guy has a lot of the same traits I did. I know the type of player you fall in love with. He has all of the intangibles. He has the skill set, the athleticism, and he could be someone that could be a day 1 starter for you. So I'm sure the guy that's training him is certainly hyping him up to Brandon Beane, to Sean McDermott, and anyone else that he has ties to. I'm sure he's said some things to the Panthers organization as well. It's not just Buffalo-centric, but it wouldn't surprise me whatsoever if McDermott's heard quite a bit about him.
Did a little research because there's another quote I wanted to pull out from Brandon that I thought was interesting. And I'm going to read the quote first. A second-round player generally is going to be somebody who is not necessarily going to start now, but it's someone you think in time will start. Hopefully by year 2, if they're healthy and everything goes on as planned. I think you are just looking at, you talk about upside, the mental factor, and what's the difference. I really don't like this quote.
Yeah,
and
I was just about to say the same. Hate it.
It got me to doing some research, and I really just wonder if, like, Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott had a ton of success in Carolina in their roles. They saw how the sausage was made, how a Super Bowl contender was built, and that team went to a Super Bowl, and they built that roster out in a multitude of ways. And then obviously McDermott not as involved in that part of it, but coaching the defense. But for Beane's perspective, like I think they're kind of slowly turning the page on this philosophy where, rookies don't have an impact. I mean, Sean McDermott said it earlier in the offseason, and it's something that, 3 or 4 years ago, even it wasn't as pronounced as it is now. I don't have the research going back that far, but check out this stat, Ryan. So I went back and looked at all 32 second-round draft picks last season. Only 8 of them had 0 starts in their rookie season. Only 8. That means if you can do the math, what is that? 32 minus 8 is 24. Sorry,
24.
I'm horrible, man. 24 second-round draft picks started at least one game last season. Those 24 players started a combined 198 games last year, and that's an average of 6.2 starts per player in the season. And guess what one of those 8 was that didn't have a single start?
James Cook,
right? Obviously had a pronounced role later in the season, but I think they got to flip it and reverse it a little bit here and figure out a way to find a player that could come in. And it's like, another thing that Brandon Beane said that kind of like I didn't love is like they talk so much about the draft board and like the player like really falling in love with the guy, right? And one question I really want to ask him, and I'm planning to at some point this offseason, maybe off to the side, not in a press conference setting, but how much can you really get to know a player in this process? Like really, like to where exactly how they're going to be on a daily basis inside your building. You know how they're going to respond to coaching, how they're going to respond to adversity, how they're going to respond to positive feedback, negative feedback. I think sometimes you got to just take a really good player that has a good attitude that you have a plan for, and there's just got to be a little bit more of that and less of the projection and the sit on your hands and wait and hope, because you're running into too many Kyer Elam situations, Boogie Basham situations, and not enough some of these other situations. And I'll let you talk, but there's a couple of really good second round examples from last year that, should push them towards finding a player and letting them play.
Yeah, and AK Cash, I was going to say the same thing. I like the Missy Elliott reference, the flip it and reverse it there, Matt Parrino. Very good. Yeah, listen, second round picks. I was actually going through the list. Cam Taylor-Britt, remember how good he was for the Bengals last season in that playoff game against the Bills? There's one of them. And that's someone that was taken at the end of the second round.
He wasn't very good when he first started playing. In the season. Remember, there was Bengals fans that were banging the drum like, why is this guy playing? And then all of a sudden, he's got this huge role in the playoffs.
And look how good he looked, because you let him go take his lumps. You let him grow as a player. You sped up the process of development, in my opinion, when you do that. Sky Moore did not have a great season last year. Might not have been someone that really had much in terms of starting time, but he got better as the year went on. They found a role for him. Trey McBride was kind of buried there behind Zach Ertz, but he's going to have a bigger role. George Pickens, one of the better wide receivers in that draft class, second or day 2 pick there early on. And then, just a few other ones that I noticed. Kenneth Walker III arguably would have been the rookie of the year had he stayed healthy there down the stretch. And kind of, Breece Hall, we can talk about him too. There's so many guys that came in and had a large role for their teams. Were some of those rosters flawed and they had a better opportunity to start? Yes, that's always how it usually goes with those early second round picks. But the Cam Taylor-Britt end of the second round, it works out that way every year. The Bills need to find someone that can legitimately come in. You can't be sitting here thinking backup year 1, starter year 2. Find someone that has a legitimate chance to start. Going to your talking point about how well can you really know these prospects, you can't. What, you get 20 minutes or is it 50? I think it might be 15 minutes now at the combine. Yeah. So first of all, you're doing your formal interviews, 15 minutes long. That's like speed dating. You might have an idea of who you like, but you don't know anything about them. So there's an issue there. You can bring someone in on a top 30 visit. They're here with you for a few hours. You take them out to dinner. They might be able to break down the tape, but there's so much more to it. There's the character aspect of it. There's the fit aspect of it. Do they fit your system? Are they what you're looking for? Obviously, if you're bringing them in on a top 30, you hope that's the case. Private workouts or just one-time workouts, it's tough. And Zoom interviews, we've done Zoom interviews throughout our lives, whether it's interviewing Bills players, this, that, or the other. It's hard to get a good grasp of even the tone that sometimes players are using in those meetings and in the interviews too. I'm sure you can't get a good feel of these prospects. So the whole system, there's so many holes in this system in terms of how you go about figuring out who's going to be these players that are your next generation, your future cornerstone guys. That's why the draft is such a crapshoot. You can think you're well prepared and you're going to whiff on a few picks, and you're never going to think you're unprepared, but there might be guys that always come and surprise you too and play a bigger role in year one than you ever envisioned.
Yeah. Like, I mean, you mentioned a couple of the examples. I mean, Roger McCreary was picked, 9 picks after Kyer Elam. He starts 17 games for the Titans. Now, the Tennessee Titans secondary was terrible. So to your point, there was more opportunity for him. But I also think the Bills sometimes overvalue experience in their scheme, especially for a team that, like, Dane Jackson isn't going to be a difference maker on whether or not you win or lose a game most of the time, right? If anything, he's probably going to be the difference maker of why you would lose a close game, making a mistake. Like, I don't think he's ever going to be in a position to win you a game. I think you can make an argument. A couple of those really close games where Kyer Elam made some really big plays last year in the regular season, he made game-winning caliber plays. That upside you just are not going to have with a 7th-round draft pick in Dane Jackson. And that's not downplaying Jackson. I think he's a good, really good, solid player. It's just you drafted Elam for a reason. Let him play. There's a comment here from Ralph Listen Sr., which, man, I mean, what a name. Scouts have personal relationships with college position coaches. You're right, they do. And you know what those position coaches are telling the scouts? Every positive thing they can find in their notebook to put their guy in the best possible light, and as they should. But you can only navigate that stuff so much when people are just constantly jamming the best of what a person is or can do at you. It's hard to kind of pick through all of it. And, from the outside looking in, Kyer Elam looked like a guy like all the pre-draft stuff where we go back and watch some of the video interactions between the Bills staff and him and like the work ethic and all those pieces. And then you get him in. There had to be a reason they weren't handing him the job. And so was that evaluation, did it not meet what ended up the player that you got and, where he was at? There's all these baked in questions that it makes it a challenge. And I don't want to undersell how hard it is to have all of it work and then land on a player. But I just think the worst thing you can do is draft a guy and then not give him an opportunity, especially at a position where there is opportunity, like for say middle linebacker, and not let him play.
I feel like, and this is just my opinion, the Bills play it too safe in the regular season with some of their players. Dane Jackson's the perfect example, Matt. Is he going to give up that big play for a touchdown? No, more times than not. He's playing off the receiver. He's coming in and making the tackle after the catch. He's giving up a fair amount of receptions along the way, but he's not getting beaten for the big one. And the athletic traits are okay. They're not off the chart. Then you get a guy like Kyer Elam. Athleticism's off the chart. The decision-making, the speed is there as a rookie. We saw it in the regular season, the interception that he had on Patrick Mahomes. We saw some great plays against the Miami Dolphins, some pass breakups in some crucial moments in the game. But they were few and far between because he wasn't given the opportunities. I almost feel like in the regular season, the Bills were afraid to let Elam get beat on a deep ball, get beaten on a play where maybe he bit on a pump fake or he bit on a route and then a double move led him down the field to a big catch for the opposing team. I would let that happen 100 times out of 100 in the regular season. Give those first, second round pick players the opportunity to play. Give them the reps. Give them the opportunities to grow throughout the course of the season. So then you're having your 11 best players on the field when it matters most come playoff time. As good as Dane Jackson is in terms of being a safe player, someone that's not going to give up that big play. The Bills did not have their best players on the field last year on defense because Kaiir Elam, in terms of the athletic traits and the makeup, was kind of sitting on the sidelines and getting rotational, snaps here and there. You just got to go for it at some point. Let those guys take their lumps as rookies because it's going to pay off for you in the long run, late in the season, in meaningful games where the Bills were missing playmakers on both sides of the ball in the playoff matchup against Cincinnati.
Our good friend of the show, Roy Collins on YouTube says, but Elam played press man in college, had to get used to playing in zone, which is absolutely correct. Yep. But how are you going to get used to playing zone in the NFL when you're not playing? And that's our whole point here. And it's not to belabor it. It's something we've talked about quite a bit this offseason. It kind of fits with the conversation of what they're going to do at 27 and making sure that in all these conversations that they have, like, Brandon Beane actually mentioned this yesterday about the debates, like once they get to a spot, like say they get to 20 and now there's a pool of players and they can make the decision, all right, do we have enough players that we like there and sit at 27, or do we get aggressive and try to move up because there's only one or two that we really want in the first round, or do we start working on a trade back because all the guys that we really like at this spot are gone? Those are all really important decisions. But I think what has to come into play and has to have a really high weight in the conversation is how much do you believe, whoever is pounding the table in that draft room, that guy could come in here and in the worst case scenario, trust him to put him on the field. And I know that's a lot of projection. You haven't seen him in your building yet, but plenty of teams do it and plenty of teams figure out a way for it to work. And that's the kind of business that we're in. And that's why this continued conversation where we have these shows and some of the comments that pop up on the side are, what would you grade Brandon Beane? Or, I don't think Brandon Beane has had great drafts. Like that's where that narrative comes from, because there's so much waffling with the player once they're in the building.
Yeah, too much waffling, too many question marks about where a player is developmental wise. AJ Epineza quietly had 6.5 sacks last year. I still don't know how good he is because of his, lack of snaps. Same thing for Boogie Basham. Hasn't been given those opportunities. James Cook looked really good last year when he was given some carries, but was he given enough of the workload? I would argue no. So I'm agreeing, whoever they draft here, round 1, round 2, get them in, let them get onto the field. Jordan Addison, let's just throw his name out there hypothetically, would be at 27, would make a lot of sense for me because there is your number 3 receiver this year. He has the upside to move up at least to a number 2 receiver in his career, but you can get him on the field, get him meaningful snaps right out of the gate. We know how important that slot position can be for Josh Allen in this offense, and you're giving Allen another playmaker. You're improving this team. If there's one of the tackles that falls into that range, yes, by all means, go up and trade up because every team every year wants tackles. They're always trying to find really good players that you can trust as your left and right tackle because those are such important roles in terms of protecting your quarterback and even getting your run game going. You need players like that. So go out and get them. Get aggressive. I agree with what Brandon Beane said, that based on the lack of first round grades, that they have on players, if he was Vegas, he would say they're more likely to trade down than trade up. But if one guy is there that you think, okay, we can put him in immediately in this role and let him grow as the season goes on, by all means, I hope the Bills do it.
By all means, hit that like button, subscribe to the Shout channel as well. We really appreciate it for all of you watching on YouTube right now. If you're over on Facebook, part of the family, thank you so much. A little shout out for Wingnuts, the official chicken wing now of the Shout podcast. We're planning our next event, tentatively scheduled for May 20th. We'll let you know if that changes or if we lock it in as soon as that is finalized. Okay. Huge day for Damar Hamlin yesterday, Ryan. I mean, It was amazing to watch him walk into that room. If you're watching on YouTube, you could watch that entire press conference on our channel. I made sure to post that right after it was done. It was super cool to hear him talk about the journey that led him back to, his decision to try to make a comeback. And he was, there's video footage out. I put it on my Twitter account of him working out with his teammates during voluntary OTAs. And, you know, it was just a cool sight to see. He announced that it had been officially diagnosed that he suffered commotio cordis, which is that direct blow to the left side of your chest, like right on the spot. Like it usually happens from a baseball in baseball, or a puck in hockey, directly to the heart there. Obviously T Higgins on that hit, it was direct hit, and that's ended up what doctors figured it out to be. His heart stopped twice on the field. We knew that at the time, the defibrillator, all that kind of stuff. It was a scary, scary scene. And he said yesterday that, part of why he wants to come back, it's for himself. It's not to prove anything to anybody, but he also wants to be kind of like a symbol of, confidence, and like not having any fear, right? And that's baked into what, his comeback as well. He's now on track to be the Bills' fourth safety if he is able to come back. Where does this development put safety? Because one of the guys that we talked a lot about on Saturday, and we've talked about throughout this entire draft season, is Brian Branch, the top safety out of Alabama, probably a definitive first round grade on most boards, maybe they're at 27. The Bills, though, have four safeties. I mean, Hamlin, they signed Taylor Rapp, Poyer, and Hyde. If he's on the board at 27, does the current state of the safety position for the Bills, Benford, the potential to maybe work some guys, Cam Lewis on the roster, he could play safety, does that take them out of the safety market in this? Because Brandon Beane said no. He's not ruling it out necessarily.
Yeah, no, I agree with Brandon Beane. No, it doesn't take you out of it, because just like the defensive tackle conversation we were having, you have to look at the safety position long term. Jordan Poyer signed a 2-year deal. Technically, you could get out of it after one. I don't think the Bills would want to do that, but still, that's a short-term deal. Micah Hyde, last year of his contract. Taylor Rapp signed a 1-year deal. Damar Hamlin, great moment. Glad he was able to announce, his comeback. He's been cleared. Awesome story. I hope that he has a great camp, looks the part, is that clear-cut number 4 safety, maybe even gives Rapp a run for his money for safety number 3. But you don't want to just bank on those guys because you have to think long-term. And Branch is someone that Joe B pointed out on our draft show. If you haven't watched it yet, go back, check it out on YouTube, check it out on your favorite podcast platform. He's someone that you could get in even as a rookie, get him snaps, move your players around a little bit. Joe mentioned moving kind of Poyer up next to Matt Milano at times, letting Branch play in the backfield, getting him meaningful reps as a rookie. But then, year 2, first round pick in this scenario, he's someone that you're going to want out there starting opposite Poyer, and you're going to want him to be a big part of your future. So no, you never take a player off your board because you have 4 guys. And listen, you have 2 outstanding all Pro Bowl type players in Hyde and Poyer, but they're also on the wrong side of their careers in terms of the age, in terms of injury concerns. You have to also think about your future at that position. And in a weak safety class, if Branch is by far the best player available there, I don't see if you're Brandon Beane, why you don't go that route, because then you're ensuring yourselves that you have another playmaker there for the foreseeable, 4-5 years. Obviously, if he's a first round pick, is that 5th-year option.
Good comment here from Brandon Day on YouTube. Did you all see the comments Von Miller made on the Pat McAfee show? And we should probably hit on this briefly here. We've talked about DeAndre Hopkins on this show, but Von Miller on the McAfee show today said word on the street is that we, the Bills, might be getting another big-time weapon. Miller told McAfee. We missed out on OBJ. It's another big weapon out there. Obviously, we have a story up at the site right now from yesterday when Von Miller said, you just never know until you know. Hop said he wanted to be a Buffalo Bill. You just never know until you get that DeAndre Hopkins signature on the contract, which, that would be, I guess, alluding to the Cardinals eventually cutting him, which would, probably in the cards. I mean, there was a report out that there's not a lot of teams interested in trading for him and maybe wanting to figure out a new deal. Trade for sure, to me, feels like it's going to be a tough thing to figure out for Brandon Beane from a cap perspective. If he hits the open market, it's interesting, but how is Hopkins going to take a deal that pays him less than what OBJ just got? And I just don't see the Bills paying that.
Yeah, it's tough, and I know Hopkins came on Twitter and said he's not looking for a new contract, or looking for extended years, more money, anything like that. But he's going to want something in that $15 million range, you would think, and that's going to be hard for the Bills to manage unless they really feel good about his, him long term, 3-4 years. Then maybe you can lower the cap hit, make it very team friendly this year. Bank on the TV money, raising the cap hit significantly next year, and you can kind of get him underneath that. But it causes even more issues there with the cap space, the fact that you want to keep your young players, and now with the Von Millers of the world, with some of these older veterans that you have on this roster, you might be handcuffing yourself from re-signing a young guy, finding younger players that can be long-term starters for you. So it's a tough matchup. And, Von Miller says a lot of things. He said a lot about Odell Beckham Jr. last year. Now, mind you, I think he was talking about Odell Beckham Jr. Helping any team, or specifically the Bills, with the playoff push late in the season. And I just don't think that Beckham Jr. health-wise was there. But, he's saying all the right things, getting the fan base pumped up. Hopkins may want to be a Buffalo Bill. There was the video there where he kind of gave that smile for the Bills and the Chiefs when talking about, would you want to play for these teams, without saying a word. So yes, the interest is there on his side, but do the dollars and cents make sense? I don't know if that could get worked out on both sides where they'd be happy with it. If Hopkins truly is just looking to hopefully try to win a ring, then maybe there's some talks that can be had if he were to be released. Trade, like you said, would be very tough to maneuver cap-wise.
Yeah, and Roy and another commenter say that Vaughn hasn't been great at predicting these things, hasn't been a very reliable source. Listen, I think Vaughn's going to try to chase great players and try to put it together some way that he can. Problem is Brandon Beane has a lot of things that he's got to deal with from not only like the salary cap this season, 2024, 2025. I mean, the cap is going up, but you want to make sure that you're being responsible in that regard. What else we got here, Ryan Talbot? We got to finish this thing up here.
Well, I think just real quick, cap is going up, but Josh Allen right now, what is he, 7th, 8th in quarterback salary?
Yep.
Something like that now, and Joe Burrow is going to cash in, and it's not going to be long before Josh Allen's bumped out of the top 10, and maybe he's just going to be the good guy that says, hey, I just want to win, we'll build around it. But at the same time, if you're a top 2, top 3 quarterback and you keep playing like it, you're going to either say, get more guys around me, or I want to kind of get some more money work coming my way. So it's not just even looking to keep the core good or have enough cap space to bring in new guys. You also have that franchise quarterback, and it costs a lot of money, and it might not be long. This is, just on my end, where I could see a player like that saying, well, I'm all of a sudden top 12, top 14 in quarterback salary, and I'm way better than this, and this guy. Where's my money? Or get me a little bit more with the money keep going up, with the cap space continuing to go up. So another kind of wrinkle to kind of keep an eye on over time.
Yeah, the Allen future, by next off season, he's going to be out of the top 10. I mean, Joe Burrow, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert, and who was Tua potentially if he has a big year.
He'll probably get a new deal. Trevor
Lawrence. And so, yeah, that's really interesting to think about. Now, the one thing I do think about Allen is he's not going to do anything that puts the team's ability to operate in jeopardy. I wouldn't think. I mean, you can't predict the future. Maybe he suffers a bad injury and he wants some, stability long term. I get all of that. I mean, he spent a lot of his press conference yesterday talking about, changing the way that he plays the game and, realizing now that he's getting older and having that, state of mind where, okay, there's, it's second and 8. And instead of, pushing through after 5 yards to get those few extra, maybe you just live for a 3rd and short and take the safe play. And, we could talk about that a little bit in Josh's just mindset. He came in and said that at this point in his life, he has never been felt more locked in or focused on football. And to me, I think there's a lot of things baked in to that. Obviously, a lot of people talking about it maybe being some internet rumor stuff that we're not going to kind of get into on this program, but also he talked about last year and like what a drain it was to go through it. Like the physical, obviously the elbow injury, the mental and emotional side of it. Like obviously with Damar, but sometimes people forget. We mentioned this on the show before. Dawson Knox losing his brother at the start of the season. That was a really emotional time for this entire organization. Josh Allen was best friends with Dawson Knox. And so those kinds of things, the emotional part of having to set aside the feelings and go out and play. And I know it wasn't his brother, but it was his best friend, and his best friend probably went through it all season long and seeing him go through it. The Matt Ariza deal that happened, Kim Pagula, that we've kind of really come to learn the depth of that whole story. So it's just a lot went into last season. And for him to just say, I took the last couple months to just rest, reset, move forward. I don't know. I think that puts him in a really good spot. And the self-evaluation, I'm interested to see what version of Josh Allen comes out in 2023.
Yeah, same here. And, I do like the fact that he's alluding to trying to stay healthy or not taking the unnecessary hits that he's taken. Of course, the injury this past season came on a hit where he was in the pocket on the elbow, or his arm was hit when he was getting ready to throw the ball. So it's not a perfect science. He wasn't running on that plate and taking an unnecessary hit there. But he's also, mid-20s now, and that's not old by any stretch of the imagination for a quarterback or any player in the NFL. But he realizes that those hits can take you out of action for many weeks, can take you out for a season, but it can also limit your ability to play at a top level. And I think that gets lost in everything late last season. The fact that Josh Allen was not anywhere near 100% because of that elbow injury, and it limited the way that he played, and it hurt this team. So he's just trying to make sure that he can stay healthy. And, Brandon Beane said all the right things at the end of last season about protecting him. He's added some guys at guard. They might add some more linemen in this draft or post-draft. But it works both ways. Allen has to do his part as well. I do like the part where, he's talking about the focus on football and really wants to bring that Super Bowl title to Buffalo. They've been, close. They've been, last year, they were the number 1 seed for a good portion of the season in the AFC. The year before that, they were 13 seconds away from moving on to a championship. They've been in the championship game. Now it's just about putting it all together. And as long as you have Allen, and a healthy Allen, you're going to find yourself in a good spot late in each season to potentially contend for a Super Bowl.
Friend of the show, former producer, AJ Sabalski. He said a lot last year that he's a football player first and a QB second. And he specifically mentioned yesterday that he wants to try to flip that. And I definitely think that was, it's relevant. And I don't know if he's ever going to truly be able to do this at the horn. Is that the train?
No, that's my cat trying to literally get in my lap right now. So, it's always something here.
Always something at the Talbot household.
That's right.
It's fun. What time does the train usually come through?
9-ish, I think. So
9-ish. All right. We're a little bit off. That's all right. It's okay. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how he looks from a quarterback perspective in this new, safer version. But I think it's also important to remember, and I think it was NFL Thursday Night Primetime put out a tweet I saw today. 3 straight seasons of 35 or more touchdowns and 3 straight seasons of 4,000 or more yards passing. So I think sometimes, the quarterback conversations on social media are always fun, but I think that sometimes we also don't take a second to remember who Josh Allen was in 2018 and the amount people take what he's accomplished in these last 3 years for granted now that he's entered the chat in that elite tier. And it's almost like, all right, how you gonna get better than that? How are you going to improve on 9 touchdowns in the playoffs over 8 quarters, that kind of thing. It constantly is a conversation.
It's funny, you're right. People take it for granted, fans maybe, but yeah, this time of year, every quarterback prospect that's raw gets compared now to Josh Allen. And while this might be this team's Josh Allen, and Anthony Richardson has been this year's Josh Allen from what I've seen in a lot of the analysis, and has the intangibles, has the skill set. So every year we can develop this guy and he can be our Josh Allen. So from the outside, from the national media, there are still people realizing how much the Bills hit on that. And I know Bills fans know that Allen's a special quarterback, but he continues to find ways to develop his game, to take another step as a player. Early on in his career, obviously worked on the accuracy every year, got better and better there, found new ways to improve each season, whether it was a short passing, deep ball. It'll be interesting to see what his goal is for this season in terms of what area did he want to improve the most, because whatever it is, he usually accomplishes whatever that goal is.
Nikki G asked, was it just me or was Allen and McDermott suddenly throwing shade at Stefon Diggs for not being at voluntary workouts? I know he said it wasn't a big deal. I didn't get that sense from Allen at all. Actually, he said he wished he was there, but knows that, the voluntary part. McDermott, obviously had the comment about you can't, form a team if you're not there type of thing. I'm paraphrasing.
Yeah.
I thought the biggest,
something like that.
Yes, I was going to say, I thought that was the biggest, I think it was unintentional, actually. I don't think Vaughn was referring to Diggs, but I think he was saying there is real value to, even if you are that $20 million edge rusher that could easily in your 12-13 season, you skip out on the voluntary portion. It says something to show up, be a part of the team, start that building process. And I think inadvertently threw some shade at Diggs.
Yeah, I think that's exactly. He was not calling out Diggs. He always refers to Diggs first thing when he's talking about all the stars on this team. So loves Diggs as a player. But you're right. Inadvertently, I think some shade was thrown. It's important for the young guys to see us here. It's important for us to develop that, the chemistry as a team. And he's getting paid big money. Josh Allen's being paid big money. And, some of the first guys in the door. And in the comments, I heard Diggs was at Coachella. And I think, yes, that's where he was. And listen, New York, I think it was the New York Post and a lot of other media outlets, Pro Football Talk, made a big deal out of this. Oh, Diggs isn't there at the start of voluntary workouts. He wasn't here last year. He wasn't there 2 years ago. This is just kind of how he works. He has his own workout regime. He's not just sitting on his couch eating Pringles. He is working out. He's in great shape. He posts some of the videos.
Wait a second. If you're sitting on your couch, why are you going to be eating Pringles? Why is that the go-to?
No, Pringles just came. I don't even eat Pringles. I don't know. It just came.
So why are you throwing Pringles out there?
I don't know. Maybe I'm trying to get us another sponsorship, Matt. Thanks. And there goes that one. There goes that. Sorry, Pringles. Jeez.
I don't even know if Pringles is still in business, dude. I can't remember.
They are still in business. They're in an aisle. They are. That's ridiculous.
How would you know? You say you don't eat them.
I don't eat them, but I see them in the supermarket.
You've seen them in those weird silos?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, AJ, I'm about to block you from this channel with that cane sauce slander. Quiet down. All right, we've gone long enough. An hour on the dot. Some really good conversation. We're getting ourselves greased up, ready to go for next week. It's going to be all hands on deck if anything happens. If there's a report that we got. Oh, you know what? We should talk about one thing before we go. Yeah. I had this in the outline and I didn't bring it up yet. Zay Flowers requested for a special private with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce via the Chiefs. What's your take on this? Because if I'm Brandon Beane, I'm like, wait a second. We met with Zay Flowers. We've done all the work on this guy. And the Chiefs are coming in here picking after us and all trying to get up on that Zay Flowers action. If he's there at 20, right? If you're Brandon Beane, what's your reaction to this? Is it okay, because some of the smoke that we've read is that Addison is kind of the the dark horse, if you will, the
Mhm.
true apple of the Bills' eye. Does this Zay Flowers Chiefs thing, does that change things for Brandon Beane, or does this feel like maybe a smoke maneuver from the Chiefs? I don't know. This seems very, very public for this stage in the game.
Here's what I'll say. It shouldn't affect the Bills' thinking. If you're drafting a player based on a private workout with Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, and you're taking him for that reason, you shouldn't probably be in the position that you're in. And I'm not saying that Brandon Beane would do that. I'm just saying in general, you shouldn't make a move based on something that happened with another team, even if they are one of your main rivals for what you're trying to do. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was unique. Players all the time have these private workouts. I don't think teams usually bring along their franchise quarterback and first ballot Hall of Fame tight end with them in these scenarios. But, the Chiefs did it for a reason. Zay Flowers, I'm sure, was thrilled by it to kind of get to see what it would look like working together for whatever that reason was. But it was definitely something that made you raise your eyebrows. And listen, the Bills, their board's not set just yet, but can you imagine, Matt, the meltdowns that this fan base will have if like the Bills go defense round one and then the Chiefs do take like a Zay Flowers or something a few picks later? Oh, the mentions will be a nightmare. So don't do something based on what another team is doing, but hopefully the Bills go out and get their own guy, whether it's an offensive lineman or wide receiver, including Flowers, if they feel like that's the best player available for them and someone that can make an impact year one.
Well, you've made an impact every year that you've been on the Shout Football podcast. I just try to live up to the standard that you set, despite your horrific taste in potato chips. All right, that's going to do it for tonight. He is Ryan Talbot. I am Matt Parrino. You can find Ryan at some supermarket in Olean, just filling his cart with the silos of Pringles. All right, everybody, take care. Have a good one.